Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jayme Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
And in this episode, we're excited to welcome a special guest. Bishop Mike Ellis serves as a bishop within the Catholic Apostolic Church in North America, or CACINA, and we've invited him to help us to think more deeply about the future of independent Catholicism, pastoral care, ecumenism, the ministry of accompaniment. Given his tremendous combination of theological formation, clinical psychology, hospice ministry, and now Episcopal leadership, we're just very, very excited to have you with us, Bishop Mike Ellis. Welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be here today. I've been a big fan of Extraordinary Catholics for a long time, and I'm delighted to share some springtime with you guys and your listeners.
Bishop Mike, you've also been a tremendous bridge builder and champion within our own efforts here within inclusive or independent Catholicism. We've had a number of virtual conversations since the COVID pandemic, and you've just been a constant presence. And I know that many of us have enjoyed the wisdom and the deep well from which you draw. So before we jump into conversation, Bishop Mike, just wondering if you might help our listeners to better know you, maybe to tell us about yourself, your formation and education, your current ministry, anything you'd like for our listeners to know about you, Bishop Mike.
Oh, I did. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, almost 70 years ago. Now, the world was younger then than it is now. And I went to undergraduate school at a Methodist university in North Carolina. After I majored in English literature. After that, I went to Duke Divinity School, took my Master of Divinity in 1982. I entered Duke Divinity School as an Episcopalian, and after my first year of studies, I converted to Catholicism. In fact, one of the professors at Duke, one of the Catholic professors at the Divinity School at Duke at that time was Father Roland Murphy, Carmelite and co-editor of the Jerome Biblical Commentary. He was the person who received me into the church. I finished at Duke, and then was not entirely certain that I was called to a life of celibacy. Got a job down the street, literally, at a local mental health center as a pastoral counselor, and after a few years thought, seemed like a pretty good fit. So I went back and got a graduate degree in psychology and postgraduate work in behavioral medicine and health psychology. And I was a psychologist for 40 years, the last 10 of which were in Montreal. It was after my husband and I retired and came back to the States, now in Vermont, and I was casting about looking for something to do, that I discovered that there was an opportunity to serve part-time as a chaplain, interfaith chaplain, in hospice care. And I thought, well, this is sort of where I came into all of this. So I started doing that in part-time, and lo and behold, after about a year, I discerned a vocation. You know how Jesus is, you give him an inch and he takes a mile. At that time, I was still Roman Catholic. I went into a period of discernment that two very dear Quaker friends of mine helped facilitate for me. And I affiliated with the Catholic Apostolic Church in Brazil, walked with them for a couple of years, and was ordained a priest 4 or 5 years or so ago, and more recently, for my sins, a bishop.
Bishop Mike, what a delight to have you here with us and to hear of your vocation as well. Many of us know that you just have such a broad range of experiences, which you bring from your nearly 70 years of experience on this earth. I'm particularly interested by this chapter of your life at the Duke School of Divinity and how that might have shaped your theological imagination, say. Tell us about that experience and perhaps some of the voices, some of the professors, some of the courses, some of the ideas that really helped to open your eyes and to open your mind at that point in your formation.
Well, it was formation is the word for it, Jayme. It was absolutely formative. As witnessed by a change in denominational affiliation for me. At the time, I was one of only two Roman Catholic students at the Divinity School who were enrolled in the Master of Divinity program. We had two Roman Catholic professors, Dr. Roland Murphy and Dr. Jill Raitt, who taught me most of what I know about church history. I had a dual concentration in divinity school in historical theology. That was really my thing. But then I had this thing on the side of pastoral counseling, and who knew that was going to come in handy. Duke, when I got there, was firmly embedded in neo-orthodoxy. Specifically the work of Karl Barth, of course, and this reworking of liberal formulations of Christianity with a view towards trying to resurrect, if you will, some of the older quote-unquote apostolic formulations of Christianity. And so I was there during all of that time. And what was just beginning to happen at that time was liberation theology was being introduced at Duke. In fact, during one of my seminars at Duke, I was privileged to go to Mexico and on a student study, looking at liberation theology. In fact, it was the same year that Oscar Romero was assassinated. We were supposed to meet with the Bishop of Cuernavaca, and he was unable to keep that meeting because he and other bishops had been called to a regional meeting. So I had some initial introduction to incarnational liberation theology, which cannot be separated from incarnational theology. There's the wonderful connection there between the two of them. And came back to it after a while. And my readings in it are not as broad as they are in church history. But currently, the dean of the Divinity School, Edgardo Colon Emmerich, is from Puerto Rico and is a major Oscar Romero scholar. And I'm happy to say now that there's a House of Catholic Studies at Duke Divinity School, and there's a vital and vibrant Catholic presence there.
You know, it strikes me, Bishop Mike, that you really were ahead of the curve as a layperson doing an MDiv in the early 80s, because the surge in lay participation in those programs really hits in the early 90s. So you were ahead of the curve, and I just find it so fascinating that you were drawn to theological / ministerial studies, and then shifted into studying and serving around psychological wellness. And I'd love to hear about the intersections of that. Like, what are the threads that weave together from those two disciplines, or what about the first informed the second, and then later the second informed the first? I'd love to hear that.
Thank you, Trish. And I have to say that when I was at Duke, the other student who was also Catholic was also a layperson and was not preparing for ordination. He was married, nice fellow. And I don't know what he eventually went off and did, but I know he finished. Bonhoeffer said that whenever he was faced with a major decision he had to make, that somebody was always there to point him in this direction or in that direction. And there were some people when I first started in pastoral ministry along mental health lines with Master of Divinity and working as a therapist in a local mental health clinic initially. I had a lot of folk who were interested in the intersection. And so what it did was it made me do some research on it and pretty much educate myself about it. Now 30, 40 years later and returning to ministry as a service separate and distinct, they're related to mental health. I'm learning a lot when it comes to those very distinctions. Having said that, there are many, many points of contact, I think. Certainly the idea of wholeness. What does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to be a person? How do we promote human thriving? How do we identify and name those things that prohibit or inhibit human thriving? One of the things that I have said to my clients in pastoral ministry, the pastoral ministry that I'm in now, which is full-time hospice care, but also saying mass all over everywhere and having some other presences in other ministry settings. One of the things I say to people who are living with anxiety, for example, is that, it used to be that the church's view of anxiety was, well, if you're anxious, then you don't have enough faith. There's something you're doing wrong. And then that sort of morphed into, well, we can't really help you with that, but here we're going to, in a non-judgmental sort of way, refer you to a therapist, who can help you. But there's a different way of viewing it, and that is for us to meet people where they are and try to ground them and root them in this wonderful story that we're all grounded and rooted in. For example, in the Gospel of Mark, every single event that is recorded of people coming to Jesus for help, with the exception of two, every single event describes the person in one way or another as being anxious. So it would seem that anxiety is a perfectly valid way to approach Jesus and to be received in a non-judgmental way that helps us through it and helps us with it. There are lots of points of contact. I think there are also, frankly, contested boundaries. The primary one I think that I have discovered is that most psychological systems and programs, there are, when I was in school, there were maybe 14, 15, 16 schools of theology, of psychology. Who knows how many there are now? But most of them have as a goal awareness that a person can come out of fixed or obsessive or compulsive habits, can resolve conflicts, internal conflicts, oftentimes trauma-induced conflicts, and can live an autonomous life and a self-directed life. That's not so much a Christian calling. If in psychology the task is to gain control, in at least my reading of the New Testament and of Jesus, is that after we gain control, and we certainly have to do that in the service of psychospiritual health, but then we are called upon to give it up, to acquire ego strength, and then surrender it. And that is something that psychology is agnostic about. Recognizing, well, we can't really go there, that's cultural, this is what we can do. for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different goals, ultimate goals, I think. I think, as a Christian, I would consider many of psychology's goals to be penultimate goals, not ultimate ones. But Christianity, the life of discipleship in Jesus, is one in which we sort of live codependent lives. I'm not okay unless you're okay. And there is a part of me that I give up in order to be continually to be conformed into this image that God knows and God speaks into my life. I absolutely believe that these two disciplines, I don't like to call Christianity a discipline, but I actually absolutely believe that these two phenomena are and can be and rightly ought to be supportive of each other. And so, but yeah, it's an ongoing, for me, it's an ongoing process of discovering, oh, this is different. Being a priest is different than being a therapist. As a priest, I show up at your house, right? Don't do that as a therapist. As a priest, I share my story with people. Don't do that so much as a therapist. I mean, some situations you might do that. But I can't tell a story as a Christian about what it means to be a Christian without including myself in it. If that's helpful.
Bishop Mike, I'm fascinated by, especially when you talk about anxiety. I hadn't even thought about how often that occurs in the Gospel of Mark, so appreciate your opening my eyes to that. But I'm reflecting on the question that I have for you as bishop and psychologist has to do with how it is that we as a church and as ministers, both ordained and as lay leaders within the church, might better help those who are journeying through various challenges in life. I'm thinking that we live in a culture and a society that often stigmatizes various mental health challenges. And yet we as a church are called to respond to people who are carrying tremendous anxiety or depression or grief or loneliness or you name it. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts from your background, both as psychologist and bishop, about how it is that we might better help one another through the dark valleys in life despite any lack of preparedness. I was speaking to a very enthusiastic lay leader this morning who just felt, when I joked with her about maybe she'd like to step in and host one of these co-host one of these episodes for me in my place, she was like, oh no, I could never do that. There's just something about how do we, when we don't feel equipped to be able to help people in various situations, is there any advice, suggestions, thoughts that you might give us that might help us to be able to better accompany one another, especially in the dark moments and dark valleys of life?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Jayme. Thank you. And what I'm hearing you say is, how can we have a ministry that has the opportunity to effect change, reduce suffering, the degree to which we can do something, an intervention, for example, can reduce suffering is the degree to which it has a theological dimension. I think that, we go back to our own devotional practices, and we ought to have devotional practices, regular devotional practices. Surely the foundation of all Christian ministry is prayer. And when I was a therapist, I prayed for my clients a lot. I didn't tell them that I was doing it, but I did it. And now as a priest, I can tell them that I'm doing it. And I can pray with them, not just for them, but with them. And indeed, am called to do that, especially for us as priests. We're not Protestant ministers. We're priests. We're mediators of grace, along with the entire people of God. We all share in the priesthood. But we can't talk about this without talking about prayer and staying in prayer, remaining in prayer. I looked at I looked at all of the potential topics that you had identified so kindly. These are really good questions, by the way. We're going to be interviewing somebody for a job. We need another chaplain. I'm going to use some of these questions that you've got. These are great. But one of the things that you asked in your list of potential conversation topics was, what is the most underrated Catholic practice? The divine office, right? I've been saying it only now for like 6 years, ever since, well, the year before I was ordained, when I first started walking with CACINA, I started reciting it, and I do it twice a day, the breviary. And I don't do all of the offices, but I do 2 of the offices, the morning and the evening. And now it's like getting dressed in the morning. I sometimes I do it mindfully, sometimes I do it mindlessly, but that's okay. I'm not trying to change God's mind about something, right? Who knows whether the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac is persuadable? Right? We don't know about that exactly. But the prayer changes me, right? And it clothes me. And I discover that the day is more intelligible. So that's a foundational kind of response, not a specific thing that we would do. But certainly one of the things that prayer does is it calls us to intercessory activity on behalf of other people, and that builds empathy. And that makes me think about, okay, well, what can I do to help this person? Well, maybe I can get educated about this, that, or the other, or I can signal to the person in some way or another, I share some of, or I know someone who shares some, or I'm related to someone, I love someone, I live with someone, or next door to someone. Tell me more about these challenges for you. I am an ally to you, but all of that is grounded in the Lord sifting us, and preparing us to go out there and stumble along in His service.
You mentioned Jayme's wonderful questions, and I was struck by one of them, Bishop Mike, and so I'm going to give him credit for crafting this question. But he asks, as both a psychologist and a bishop, what concerns you most about the emotional and spiritual health of Americans today? And it's such an important question, and, I think one of the things that, we're dealing with is that, I'm, in a region where there's been a lot of emotional trauma in recent months, and that people are not empty vessels sitting in that pew waiting for you to just have some, or God to just, I like to believe God will fill them, but people bring so much now, and even beyond the people in our churches, just in our cultures. I'm just wondering what issues are you seeing that you have concerns about, or would like to kind of shine a light on for those of us who are leading pastorally?
I think it's the relativization of truth. The truth used to be comforting, right? At least as Christians, we have a lot of truths that we subscribe to. When you think about it, and some of them are pretty strange, right? We follow this guy who lived briefly, died violently, and rose unexpectedly. But we hold those to be true. And for those of us who have experienced that as good news, we have an alternative story that we're grounded in and that we're rooted in. But the relativization of truth strikes at the heart of that. And that's not, in our pluralistic society, that is not something that it's easy to tackle in a mindful, respectful, sort of way. When I was at Duke, one of the professors there told us a story about a professor acquaintance of his in the School of Religion, not in the Divinity School, but the School of Religion, which was down the hall from us, and they were good friends. And this particular professor was an expert in Islamic studies, and he asked. In fact, the person he asked was Dr. Willimon, who later on became a Methodist bishop and still has some adjunct faculty role, I think, at Duke. At any rate, he asked him if he would take him into Duke Chapel, which is this huge Gothic edifice that the Divinity School is attached to. And as Professor Willimon was showing him around and telling him the stories, and that were relayed in the stained glass, they had a very good relationship. They could be frank with each other. And his friend said, this is just like profoundly insulting in some ways, to other faiths. And Willimon said, yeah, I know, that's who we are. He just acknowledged it and said, we have this story that we're grounded in and we're rooted in, and it sometimes treads on boundaries and does all kinds of things. I was in a meeting the other day of laypersons, and I said, when was the last time you were at a dinner with some friends and you asked them if any of them were Christians? And people just froze. And I said, we really ought to be able to talk about that, or at least live our lives in such a way that without having to say a word about it, that somebody would come up to us and say, what are you on? Why is it that you always have a cheerful demeanor? How is it that, even though you don't have a lot, that I see you doing things for other persons, so that people come up to us and say, what is it that's going on with you? Mm-hmm. This incarnational kind of ministry. So, I'm talking foundational kinds of things now, but I think the relativization of truth, the truth used to be comforting, at least from a Christian perspective. It was comforting. God is determined to save each and every one of us, and is going to. And that's very good news.
My mind went to that hymn we sang in the early 70s in Catholic churches, and it's way beyond just the Catholic world, which is, they'll know we are Christians by our love. They'll know we are Christians by our love. And some of those simple songs that were the post-Vatican II canon that I was singing as a youngster in the second row of the folk mass with my little 6-string, had such pure and simple messages that are really deeply embedded in my bone marrow. And I think about that question you asked. It's one I've been grappling with here too, and asking people, which is, first of all, as Roman Catholics, we were not really taught to evangelize. Right. Evangelization in the Roman Catholic world was called a reproduction. You have a big family and you bring those kids for baptism and you open up the phone book and you see where the Roman Catholic Church is and you join it. It was very cut and dried. It was not a tradition dependent on us sharing our faith. And so now we're in a very different paradigm, as we all know, as pastoral leaders. And we do need to share our faith, but we're also in a moment where, forgive me, my first career was in marketing, where the brand is tarnished. There's a reason people don't want to say, I'm a Christian, because they think that will evoke in their listeners this whole world of this ugly bias. All you have to do is go on any social media platform And, people who are claiming they are Christian are saying the most outrageous things. So it's very painful. Like, how do you help people, get past that? And the other thing that I've been grappling with, because we have a lot of young gay folks who find us, we're about to do 3 different pride gatherings here in Minnesota, just dealing with religious trauma, dealing with these messages that were so dehumanizing, so marginalizing, so deeply wounding. And just wondering if you have any insight for us as pastoral leaders about how do we go about equipping people so that they can feel comfortable saying, you know, I'm a Christian, or even just, being in that space of being able to listen to people into life who have really had deep wounds from their encounter with the Christian community.
That's great, Trish, and I appreciate that very thoughtful question. I also loved your phrase that the simple, loving message of some of those early hymns was in your marrow. That's wonderful. It's become part of your DNA now. I don't think there's any way around it. I mean, the only way out of it is through it, right? I mean, we're just going to have to risk that we can live lives of Christian discipleship, which might include from time to time inviting somebody to church, and then be prepared for the questions that come. I think another thing is the church being, we as church, the great church, all of us, being willing to really enter into incarnational ministry, which means rolling up our sleeves and standing with and beside and in front of and above and below the people around us who are vulnerable, who are continuing to be made vulnerable, and who have histories of religious trauma that prevents them, not ultimately, but prevents or inhibits them from receiving the good news as good news. There has always been a tradition and a segment of the church that has gotten out in the streets with collars on and testified at local school PTA meetings. Sorry about that. And made itself visible as church, standing up for the least of those among us. And that's something. I mean, we have Jesus's, and I'll come back before I say this. Let me say that as Christians, I'm sounding preachy right now, but as Christians, everything, by definition, it's in our name, everything is subordinate to our Christology, right? Everything, including our ecclesiology. But I forgot what I was going to say now. What we have to do is be willing to stand with the dispossessed, the disenfranchised. I know what I was going to say. The Sermon on the Mount, right, and the Beatitudes, right? And then, as part of that Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is saying, "Some of you saw me hungry and thirsty, and I was a stranger. I was in prison, and you ministered to me, and some of you didn't." And the folks who said, "Lord, when did we ever see you that way?" And he says, "In the fact that you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me." But what we forget is that the people who actually did it were just as clueless, right? In the story. I mean, they say, when Jesus says, "Come on in to heaven, you did all these wonderful things for me." And they also say, "Lord, when did we ever see you? That I don't remember ever seeing you that way." And Jesus again says, "In that you did it for the least of these, my brethren, you did it unto me." they were taking care of the people who were less fortunate, not in order to get some reward from Jesus. They had no idea that Jesus was implicated in this at all. That would be pre-incarnational in their thinking. They just did it because they got to, because they were happy, and they felt like it. So, we don't keep, the Christian ethic is we don't keep the golden rule, try to keep that, right? It's easier to keep the Sabbath than it is to keep the golden rule. That wasn't exactly good news when Jesus said that all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That's not actually good news. Try to do that, right? It's a whole lot easier to keep the Sabbath than it is to do something like that. Jesus was raising the bar, not lowering it. But at any rate, they helped people because they got to. They were allowed to, not because they had to. And for us as Christians to get reconnected with the joy of our faith, again, prayer is essential to that. It shapes us, and being together and telling our own stories, supporting each other, but also then being willing to show up publicly outside of the church walls as church, with collars on and banners and crucifixes and everything else.
Bishop Mike, I'm just so moved by your current ministry too, because when we talk about seeing the face of Christ in others, especially those in need, now as a hospice chaplain, you're being present to Christ in others in a very unique way. And I'm wondering, many of our listeners know you from your writings in Extraordinary Catholic Magazine. We've archived your articles, extraordinarycatholics.faith/articles, and many of them deal with your ministry in hospice, in accompanying those who are transitioning from this life to what comes next. And I'm just wondering, from your hospice ministry, if there's anything that you might be able to share with our listeners about what it is that those who are dying have taught you, lessons for the living, and also whether there are any common lessons that repeatedly emerge from your bedside experiences with those who are in a very different stage in life.
By far, there are two questions there, and I'll answer the second one first. Or respond to the second one first. By far, the most consistently present experience that I have with people who are in active transition, a person who has minutes or hours to live, is how thin the veil is between this life and that one. And that, I walk away from an experience of silent witness to another person's passage. And you don't go on then to your next client. You don't, you don't run errands. You go out and sit in your car and you sit for a while. And then you try to let it just sort of wash over you, and also see and hear what Jesus is saying to you, in this case, saying to me about this, and whatever fears that I may have, or anxieties or worries that I may have about this very thing. So that's the first thing, I think, is how thin the veil is between this life and the next. In terms of what I have learned, it's as varied as, this is a cop-out probably, but it's as varied as the person. Some of my writings are attempts to put words on those experiences, frankly, to process those experiences, so that I try to stay emotionally, not just congruent, but also current. So that there's not a lot that I'm carrying around, but there's no way around that. You carry it. Bonhoeffer again said, when Jesus calls somebody to follow him, he always calls them to death, to die. And not just in the physical sense, which of course he did, but also in this willingness to be wholly identified with Jesus in that moment. And I'm a CACINA Catholic priest. I show up poor, humble, slightly absurd, which is probably pretty much the way Jesus showed up. And but on more than one occasion, I come away thanking the person for their life and for the privilege of being part of their journey. And guys, that the very same thing happens with you guys as well. I know, and all of us in ministry. Those moments that you come away from and you think, I think I got more out of that maybe than I contributed.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Mike, you mentioned CACINA, and I think we would be remiss not to give you an opportunity to share with people a little bit about your jurisdiction. I'm a member of the Presbyterate of the Ecumenical Catholic Communion, and there are many of these bubbling jurisdictions out there, and I'd love to hear more about the charism of CACINA, what drew you to it. It's one of the oldest jurisdictions in the United States. So give our listeners a flavor of what CACINA is all about.
Thank you, Trish. I appreciate that. I discovered it in January of 2020, and it was the only independent Catholic community that I contacted, and it was and has continued to be a good fit. It gets its name from the Catholic Apostolic Church of Brazil. There was a fellow named Carlos Duarte Costa. His mother's family was minor aristocracy. His mom's name was Da Silva. His dad's family was involved in politics. And he had an uncle, his mother's brother, who was a bishop and later a cardinal. Duarte Costa was sort of early marked for the church. He was brought to Rome by his uncle when he was 9 years old and entered a pre-seminary there, minor seminary there. Came back to Brazil and finished, curiously, at an Augustinian seminary. So, the current pope is Augustinian, interesting. And was ordained a priest by his uncle, and had a series of essentially bureaucratic jobs that his uncle probably got for him, in and around the chancellery and the diocesan offices, and then was made a bishop in his mid-30s, relatively young, and sent to, by that time, his uncle was a cardinal, and he was sent to one of the poorest dioceses in Brazil at that time, which is saying something. And it's almost certainly there that he had a transformation, and he gradually shifted his frame of reference away from this hierarchical ascent, this ladder of ascent that he was so clearly on. He was probably going to be in the Diocese of Botucatu for a few years, and then he put in a few years there, and they'd kick him upstairs. Instead, he started to refocus his attention and his ministry on the poor. Brazil was ruled by a military junta, and he started speaking out about land reform and the church needing to align itself more with the poor. He came into a lot of conflict with the papal nuncio there. And in time, he was removed from his diocese and assigned to a made-up diocese, as often happens. And that was in 36, 37, I believe. But he didn't stay quiet. World War II came, and he mouthed off a lot about Brazil's aligning itself with some of the fascist powers. And he was placed under house arrest by the government with the approval of the papal nuncio. He was released only after personal intercessions by Churchill and Roosevelt. And after the war, he made a lot of noise about how Brazil was receiving people in from the fascist countries during World War II and providing them safe havens. And he was excommunicated by Pius the 11th, maybe I think Pius the 12th, I believe it was. And the day that it happened, I mean, there's some backdoor stuff going on too, but the day that it happened, he said, well, this is the happiest day of my life. He founded the Catholic Apostolic Church of Brazil. It's in Brazilian, the way that the Roman Catholic Church is officially known as is the Catholic Apostolic Church of Rome. So when Duarte Costa founded his community, he used that nomenclature and founded it as the Catholic Apostolic Church of Brazil. He ordained 4 bishops within a couple of months because, you gotta have a bishop to make a bishop, and he was probably and rightly concerned about the potential for assassination. This was before Oscar Romero, who would be doing pretty much the very same things, 3 or 4 decades later, saying the very same things in a country ruled by a military junta. At any rate, and he sent one to Albuquerque, New Mexico, a bishop to Albuquerque, New Mexico, with the express purpose of establishing a foothold of apostolic Catholicism in America, in the United States, rather. And it's out of that bishop's missionary work that CACINA was founded. We're pushing 75 years old now. We are vanishingly small. In some ways, we function a lot like a religious order, although we do have 20 priests, and we have several folks who are in formation with us, for which we are grateful. We have 4 or 5 parishes, but most of our priests are involved in other types of ministries outside the walls of local churches. And it has been a good fit for me. I think that one of the distinctive charisms, and in response to your question about the charism for us, is this whole notion of sacramental justice. That was one of the things that Duarte Costa championed when he initially separated from Rome. There were, as I said, there were some backdoor issues as well. There were pastoral, theological, and sacramental issues as well. Specifically, Costa said that priests should not have to take vows of celibacy. Secondly, that the Mass should be in the language of the people. And thirdly, he repudiated the relatively new doctrine of papal infallibility. So that made him schismatic, not heretical, but schismatic. But we have carried that forward, this idea of sacramental justice, all of the sacraments for all of God's people who are properly disposed, and that is an organizing principle in our lives.
Bishop Mike, appreciate your filling in our listeners on CACINA. When they hear that you're a CACINA priest or bishop, they may not be familiar with that acronym. So to know that the Catholic Apostolic Church in North America goes all the way back to Roman Catholic Bishop Carlos Duarte Costa, whom many consider to be a patron saint of independent Catholicism, Saint Charles, San Carlos of Brazil. It's a fascinating history, and especially because there are so many jurisdictions that have a challenge with legacy, with really ensuring their longevity. To have a jurisdiction here in the United States that has endured for more than 75 years is truly extraordinary. Bishop Mike.
Well, and with your permission, Costa didn't die until until 1961. So I was alive when he was around, and his bona fides, if you will, as a Roman Catholic bishop, validly ordained, are unimpeachable. There are, I think, 5 bishops between him and me, all of them ordained in his line. That is one of the requirements. I'm the chancellor for CACINA as well, and so it's my job to, amongst other things, to read the canons and to be conversant in them. And one of the requirements for ordination in our church is direct line of apostolic succession through Duarte Costa. For folk who come to us from other independent Catholic or Reformed Catholic communities who don't have that, then we do or form an ordination ad cautelum or a subconditione, just to be on the safe side. That's true for incardination as well.
Yeah, you and Bishop Mike, you and Jayme and I have all been very engaged with interjurisdictional activity and very committed to us finding threads of commonality and building relationships. So I just want to acknowledge the role you've played in that and how much I appreciate that. I have a concern though, and I feel like it would be remiss not to ask you, as someone with 40 years as a psychologist. So, our movement is eclectic. It ranges from places where I see real health and people trying very much to bring what's most beautiful about the tradition forward and release some of the, for lack of a better word, dysfunction. Some of it borders on criminality from our family of origin. And then there are places where I just look and my head spins. Like, there some genuinely not very healthy corners of this movement. So I'm particularly wondering what do you have any insights for us about, like, what does it take for us to, because we're not reinventing the tradition, we're really reclaiming the early church, but to do it in a way that is healthy, that we don't import with that Roman Catholic DNA some of the serious dysfunctions that I think have crippled that community. So just wondering if you have any insights for us. I hear you focusing on something that is very important in the Ecumenical Catholic Communion, which is we take getting ordained very seriously. So in the Ecumenical Catholic Communion, we're very conscientious about taking seriously all the various milestones that will bring you to the point where you are qualified for ordination. One of them, of course, being that not only you have the appropriate equipping, but solid background check, a psychological exam, and a call from the people of God who recognize the gifts in you. But I'm wondering what we need to be focusing on as a movement to make sure that we create jurisdictions that are psychologically healthy in addition to being spiritually healthy.
Yeah, CACINA has always kept a respectful distance from much of what you are describing, Trish, for the very reasons you are describing it, and has been very circumspect in forming alliances or agreements for precisely the reasons that you're talking. I think one of the things that certainly goes into formations, and our vocations director could speak more eloquently to this than I, but is this modeling on our part that ordination is not a reward. Instead, it's a response. And that invitation that we are responding to ought to be well articulated. The person ought to be able to speak in a grounded sort of way about how they come to find themselves knocking on our door, desirous of entering into some form of sacramental ministry. The majority of our clerics have graduate theological degrees. Quite a number of them are former Roman Catholic priests or seminarians, including several who were ordained in Rome. We have other people from other denominations who were ordained, the UCC Church, the Lutheran Church, who sought a more sacramental and Catholic capital C ministry. But we do have people, who have had no exposure to graduate theological inquiry. And I think the last time I checked, which was earlier this year, Duke right now is $150,000 for the 3-year MDiv program. And obviously, and churches and denominations are hesitant these days about signing up to foot the bills for those, even within the big box, denominations, for fear that, as something I read recently, within 5 years of ordained ministry, a majority of pastors have left ordained ministry or have left parish ministry and are doing other things. So we, when we have people who come to us, one of the in addition to being the chancellor, how it is in small churches, if you don't raise your hand, somebody will raise it for you. I'm also the director of the St. Charles of Brazil Institute. And one of the things that we did since my being there is we established a relationship with the McGrath Institute for Church Life at Notre Dame University. They have a program there that is affordable, $99 a course, 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, that is taught, where the courses are taught by Notre Dame faculty. And you can get a certificate in Catholic studies in one of a variety of areas. We have our own curriculum, and so they pick and choose. But it also serves as a credentialing for Roman Catholic. That program serves as a credentialing for Roman Catholic deacons in the United States. Many of them go through that program to fulfill their academic requirements. When we graduate, and that's affordable, right? It takes 2 or 3 years, and it's affordable. And we even sometimes will subsidize that on the person's behalf. They can do it part-time, and in the meantime be ordained, or rather involved in some form of active ministry. Are we, I hesitate to quite put it this way, but that is not a program that is designed to graduate theologians, right? It is a project, it is a program that is designed to create ministry practitioners, persons who can administer the sacraments in a valid way with intention, with the correct intention, and understand what it is that they're doing. So, there's the educational part that sometimes will weed, people out. but we are in complete agreement with you about the need to be accountable to our charges, and admit people into ministry, again, who can articulate a call that they are responding to.
Bishop Mike, we've come to the point in the episode where we typically have what we call our Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, a set of 12 rapid-fire questions. Do you think you're up for the challenge?
Bring it.
Because this, Bishop Mike, is not just the Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, but this is the Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire CACINA Bishop and Psychologist Edition. Here we go. 12 questions. First question, Bishop Mike, your favorite saint?
Augustine, certainly. You gotta choose him for lots and lots of reasons. First autobiography ever written, the Confessions, modern, all of that. Augustine, as well as everything else he said.
The best thing about CACINA, the Catholic Apostolic Church in North America?
That we are faithful to a story that was handed to us, and therefore we remain apostolic.
Your favorite theologian or spiritual writer?
Probably Stanley Hauerwas, ethicist who was at Duke. He came to Duke a couple of years after me, but I've listened to him a lot and read him a lot.
Your favorite biblical character besides Jesus?
Thomas, I guess, probably. He doesn't get the credit he deserves. When Jesus is going up to Jerusalem to give himself over, in one of the Gospels, Thomas says, "Let's go with him. We'll die with him." That doesn't happen. But he was heartbroken when Jesus died.
The most misunderstood aspect of inclusive or independent Catholicism?
The most misunderstood aspect, that we not understanding our relationship vis-a-vis the Roman Catholic Church and the various iterations of that.
A book every aspiring minister should read?
Resident Aliens by Stanley Hauerwas.
One word that describes God?
Jesus. Right? That's by definition, right? It's got to be Jesus. God is whoever raised Jesus from the dead.
A hymn or song that always moves you?
It's sung to the tune of "Be Thou My Vision," but it's not Lord of All Hopefulness. Lord of All Hopefulness.
What surprises you most about hospice ministry?
That I'm still, for reasons known only to God, still plugging along with it and doing it. It was a grace I never thought the good Lord had in his back pocket for me.
3 last questions. What do people most misunderstand about death?
That it is not permanent.
The most pressing challenge facing Christianity or Catholicism today?
Remaining true to who Jesus is. There's one story, and it's the story of God in Christ reconciling the world to himself. All the other stories are, as Hauerwas would say, bullcrap.
And the final question, Bishop Mike, what gives you hope?
The Trinity. Our family of origin is the Trinity. Our DNA is the Trinity. God will accomplish God's plan in the world with or without the church.
Amen. Bishop Mike, we've come to the point in our conversation where we tend to share final words. If you don't mind, I'll jump in first, and I'll kick it over to Reverend Trish, and then we'll allow you to have the final word with us today. I just want to thank you on behalf of all who are joining us. I know you, I first came to know you when you were a young priest in our movement, coming to join our virtual conversations, and just really have always appreciated the depth that you bring to our conversations, but also your willingness to help build bridges and to be present on behalf of CACINA, the Catholic Apostolic Church in America, as a voice within that tradition, representing, to those of us who are outside of that tradition. So between that and your extraordinary contributions to Extraordinary Catholics magazine, which always features the various anecdotes from your ministry, which I know that our readers, they've told me, they just really love the very human way in which you bring those moments from ministry, accompanying those and being able to bring them into a way that our readers can really relate is just a real blessing to more people than you will ever know. So just really, really appreciate your coming on with us this afternoon and sharing nearly 7 decades of life experience and wisdom with us here today. Reverend Trish?
Thank you, Jayme.
This has been such a treat, Bishop Mike, getting to know you better. And I think I also have a deep love of Thomas. We share that. He's absolutely right up there for me. And I also have been very moved by your conviction, your deep conviction. A common prayer for me is, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And I constantly am inviting God to reveal the next thing and deepen my connection to the divine life. So I'm very moved by your clarity and your conviction. And I'm so delighted that you were able to make time to be with us. And we always give our guests the final word. So if there's anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, this is your opportunity to give us some final thoughts.
Thank you both very much. Other than again, thanking you both and acknowledging that there have been and continue to be a lot of people in my life, some from a distance, who continue to shape and inform my ministry. I would absolutely count both of you guys in that. I'm privileged to know you and to be in this endeavor of sacramental ministry as a priest. By way of final word, how would it be, since all ministry is grounded in prayer, how would it be if our final word is a word of prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray us into silence and unity with your Son. Lord Jesus, bring us to your dwelling and let us stay with you. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Mike Ellis of CACINA, the Catholic Apostolic Church in North America. We can all learn more by visiting CACINA.org. That's CACINA.org. Thank you as well for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
Let's carry forward the spirit and the legacy of Carlos Duarte Costa.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.